Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Veg Grower Podcast. My name's Richard and I want to encourage and inspire you to grow more of your own food in whatever space you have available. And I do this by showing exactly what's been going on in my own allotment, my own garden here in Littlehampton in the UK. And I've been growing my own food for over 30 years. But every day I learn something new. Now, down on the allotment, we've had some interesting experiences going on, including an infestation of caterpillars on my Brassicas. Back at home, I've built a new structure that I found, and in the potting shed, we're going to be talking about which tools I use the most. So, without much ado, let's get into it, shall we? Well, here we are, down on the allotment. It's the middle of July, and believe it or not, we have had some quite extensive rains over the weekend. It's very, very welcome, though, I have to say. We've had weeks and weeks of very, very dry weather. And the water butts have been emptied. It's been a real struggle. So to get some really good rain over the weekend has been very, very welcome. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not enough. But it's enough that it's watered our gardens, watered the allotment. The plants, and this always happens whenever it rains, they look healthier for it. The rain has really improved the condition of our plants. Now, I believe there's something about that because I think rainwater is the best thing for plants. I think it does a better job than anything else. And this is proved evident when you see how good your plants look after a good rain shower. So I'm very grateful for the rain, very grateful. It's reduced the amount of work that I need to do, reduced the amount of watering, and hopefully it's improved the allotment as well. Now, throughout the week, we have been coming down the allotment. I'm trying to get everything tidied up and looking good as always. And there's two particular areas that I've been a little unhappy with. These are areas next to both of my sheds where basically Nettles and Brambles have just got a little bit too rampant. And they're in areas that are, in my eyes, difficult to look after. They've always been difficult to look after. And they're probably areas where I need to concentrate my efforts a little bit more. So I started having a bit of a tidy up throughout the week, and I'm thinking, what can I do to make this better? Now, the trouble with things like brambles, the brambles are growing next to my gooseberry bushes, and they grow really rampant, really strong, really thick. The trouble is, to really get rid of brambles, you need to dig the roots out. And the trouble I have is that these roots are right next to my gooseberry plants. So I have two choices. Dig up the roots and dig up the gooseberry plants, or risk damaging the gooseberry plants, or just constantly try and keep on top of it. The latter isn't working. I try and keep on top of it, so we may have to resort to digging out the plants and removing those roots, which may mean we lose our gooseberry plants, but I'm not sure just yet if that's what we're going to do. Something to think about. Nettles, however, nettles do grow next to my shed, next to my compost bins at the very top, next to my corrugated iron compost bin. And nettles are actually very good for butterflies and things like that. They're a good source for nature. The trouble is they look a bit unsightly, and the allotment council don't really like to see them, which I don't blame them for, actually. I don't blame them for. It doesn't look right on an allotment. So I've cut those down, and I'm thinking that I've got some corrugated iron at home. I might turn that area into another corrugated iron bed. Lots of things I'm thinking about at the moment. We're just being a little bit hampered by the wet weather, which I'm grateful for, but it does make it difficult to do anything on the allotment. Now, one of the biggest things that I've noticed is with my Brassicas. Now, my Brassicas, cabbages, sprouts, broccoli, cauliflowers as well. Well, the story is, I noticed that my netting had been blown off. This happens quite a few times with my netting. These netting I bought many years ago. I think they come to the end of their life. But they do sometimes get blown off, which makes them very difficult to really do their job. The idea behind netting our Brassicas, really, one, keeps pigeons off, but two, to keep cabbage white butterflies off. And cabbage white butterflies we don't want on our brassicas because they lay eggs which turn to caterpillars which eat the foliage. Well, I noticed I was harvesting a cauliflower, which, first time we've harvested cauliflower this year actually, and they've done really well. They've got some decent heads on them, but I noticed there was lots of caterpillars on them. And this was a little bit annoying, a little bit worrying. So I picked off all the caterpillars, and as I went around, I noticed there was more on all the other cauliflowers as well. So what I've got to keep doing now is just constantly pick off the caterpillars and put them in a pot and take them home and feed the chickens with them. Now the thing is with caterpillars is that because we've netted them, obviously the cabbage white butterflies have got under the net somehow. As I said, I think my nets are coming to the end of their life. But the nets have also stopped any of the small birds that might come along and eat the caterpillars as well. So I've lifted the nets off the plants that are affected with these caterpillars. And what we're going to have to keep doing every day, we just pick off a few more caterpillars that we can see, we'll take them home and give them to the chickens, but we also hope that some of the smaller birds are going to come along and eat those caterpillars as well. The idea being it just makes it a little bit easier to manage. We work with nature, not against it. It's just annoying. It is very annoying because we do all this work to try and stop pests from eating our garden. Now usually I don't get many problems with pests, but this year we've had problems with slugs and snails, and in fact when I'm standing here looking around I can see lots of snails. The wet weather has just really brought them out. Last year we had problems with slugs and snails, but before that we've never had problems with slugs and snails. So last year was a very wet year, and I think what we've got to do is really increase our bird feeding stations here on the allotment to try and improve the amount of birds that can come in, especially over winter, and try and scratch around on the soil and try and remove some of those slugs and snails. I can see this happening a lot in the future to try and reduce the slug and snail population. Of course, there's many other methods of reducing slug and snail population, beer traps or just collecting them by hand whenever we see them. Not always easy, there's a lot of work involved. The thing I don't like to use is poisons. I don't like slug killers and snail killers. I could use nematodes, which I used last year, but the trouble with nematodes is, one, you've got to apply them regularly, but they actually attack every single slug in the soil. Now, why is that a problem? Well, only a small handful of slugs are actually dangerous to our plants. And when you're killing all the rest, you're basically, in my eyes, changing the ecosystem. And we want to really have a good balance. We don't want too many slugs and snails, but we want more birds at the same time. So very, very difficult to get it right, of course. But this is the joys of growing your own. We have to balance what we want by keeping our natural methods, ideally. That's how I view it anyway, and that's what I try and do. But I'd love to know, how do you tackle slugs and snails in your own allotment? What do you do to tackle slugs and snails? Right, it is now time for me to move on home, and I'm going to talk to you about this new structure that I've built in my kitchen garden. In the meantime, let's find out what's been going on in the Supporters Club this week. Well, it's time that I jump in on this podcast and just ask if you would be good enough to please leave us a rate and review on your podcast provider if you are enjoying this podcast. It honestly only takes you a few seconds, but it really helps us out and gets us found by more people who might also be interested in learning how to grow more of their own food. But not only that, you can also help support this podcast, help keep this podcast running by becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Now, the Supporters Club is set up to keep the wheels on this podcast rolling and moving forward. But I don't just take your money, I believe in giving something back. And the way I've set this podcast up is that about twice a week you will receive extra behind the scenes podcasts that give you a bit of a better idea what's going on here at the Veg Grower Podcast HQ. But added to that, once a month you will also receive our seed pack through your letterbox, and in that pack you get a copy of our mini newspaper which gives you a few ideas of what to do that month, as well as instructions on how to sow the seeds, because included in that seed pack is a collection of seeds that can be sown in that very month. Now, to give you a bit of an idea, over this last week we have been sowing some of these seeds. We've been sowing thyme, which is a delicious herb, and it's a pretty herb as well, and I think it should be in every little garden. It's not the easiest one to grow from seed, but we're giving it a go nonetheless. We've also sown some spinach. Now, spinach is something that I do try to grow a lot of. It's delicious, it's nutritious, it's tasty, it's great in any garden. So we try and grow plenty of it. Now, if that sounds like something you would be interested in, then please head to the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk to check it out and hopefully find out more. Would love to have you there. Right, back to the gardening. Well, I'm back at home now, and after seeing all those caterpillars down on the allotment, I thought I would check on my brassicas. Now, the thing that I've done differently here at home is that I haven't netted my brassicas. These are my cabbages, cauliflowers, Brussels sprouts, etc., just like what we have down on the allotment. But I haven't netted them at all here at home. And the reason being is that I do encourage more birds, or it's easier to encourage birds into my garden here at home to take care of pests for me. So it was rather nice to see that there were absolutely no caterpillars on any of my brassicas. However, wandering around the garden, I checked on some nasturtiums, which I noticed were covered in caterpillars. Now, this is one of the reasons that I grow nasturtium. Nasturtiums for me are a companion crop. They act as a sacrificial crop because they do attract backfly, and what I've also learned is they also attract the caterpillars away from my brassicas. So I'm very pleased with that. I've got to say, I don't mind the fact that the nasturtiums are getting eaten. Yes, nasturtiums are edible, but I don't mind the fact that they're being eaten by the caterpillars. And at the end of the day, I can simply pick off a few leaves with caterpillars on and give them to the chickens anyway. So win-win. And I think moving forward, what we've got to remember to do is grow more nasturtiums to add to all our beds. That way they can act as that sacrificial crop and take care of our main crops. Now, I have to admit, at the moment, my garden just feels a bit like Steptoe's yard. I've got junk everywhere. I mentioned last week that I'm having a project done with it started off with my driveway, and it's now developed that my drains need doing, which means digging up the path around my house. So we're getting the drains and the path all done at the same time. But in preparation for this, I had to clear away everything that I had. Some of this was junk, but a lot of it was things like my water butts, my Belfast sinks that grow herbs, my wood store for our wood in the winter heating, things like that. And it just looks horrible at the moment. I've got to admit, I am really getting depressed whenever I look outside my window. The veg patch area doesn't look too bad, but it's the lawn area where we've just got all this junk laid out because I've got nowhere else to put it at the moment. I'm hating it. Absolutely hating it. One of my biggest problems is I am a hoarder. I don't like hoarding, but I'm just sometimes unable to get rid of things. It's not a quality of mine that I'm proud of or anything. It's something I really want to stop. But if something's got a use, I cannot get rid of it. The trouble is then it hangs around and doesn't get put to use. This is something that I am trying to stop. This is actually quite relevant because, as you know, a couple of weeks ago we installed a new shed here, and I originally had a shed which was full of stuff as well. And when I emptied it out, one of the things that I found was this metal arch. Now, this metal arch my mum gave to me nearly 10 years ago, I think. She intended it for our garden. I put it to one side and never really put it into use. So when I pulled it out of the shed, I thought, you know what? I think we need to put it to use. We need to actually put this in place and try and make the most out of it. So I gave it a good sand down, and then I've painted it with a bit of black paint just to make it look a little bit tidier. This metal arch went together by pushing poles inside of each other to create the arch. Fairly easy to do, didn't take too long, but then I've sunken it into the ground as an arch to the side of my vegetable garden, to the side of my larger beds, basically where my sheds are as well. So it works quite nicely for that reason. Now, I'm quite happy with this because I've got to say it does look pretty good. It adds a bit of intrigue, bit of interest to the garden. Something that I've always felt the vegetable garden is lacking, and we're trying to add more features, more things that just add a bit of interest and intrigue to when we look out in the garden and see these sort of things that just make things a bit interesting. But what we're also doing is growing some fruit trees up either side. So on one side we'll have an apple tree, and on the other side a pear tree. This is to create like an apple and pear tree arch over this metal arch. I think it's going to look really nice. I've seen something similar at some gardens that we visit. I think it's going to look nice. It's going to add that air of intrigue, but also be edible and really good to look at as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this turns out, but we've got the frame set up, we've got an apple tree sort of in place. I've got a bit of finishing off to do, but it is almost in place. Now, something else that I want to mention, as I've mentioned earlier, the sun's came out now, but we did have rain quite a bit throughout the weekend, and this gave me the chance to really put my new Ryobi water pump to test. I bought this Ryobi water pump a couple of weeks ago at Gardeners World Live, and it's a good little tool. It's simply a water pump that's battery powered. It's a stick pump, so you stick in your water butt, turn it on, and it pumps water down a hose. And that's what I've been doing. Basically, with the rain that we've had, it's filled up my water butts that are still attached to gutters. And I've just pumped that to some of my other water pumps. We are expecting a little bit more rain this week, and I want to make sure that my water butts can collect as much rainwater as I can. So simply pumping this water to my other butts means that we can capture more rainwater. Something very, very important. I've spoken so much this year about how important it is to capture rainwater. This has been really important this week because we have actually collected quite a bit of rainwater in just a few, I won't say short showers, but a few showers, well, heavy showers, I think you could say. There was talk of a thunderstorm. We didn't get it, but there was certainly plenty of rain that's filled up our water butts really nicely. And by pumping them about, we maximise the amount of water storage that we have. So it has been a very productive. I would be happier when this driveway pathway project is completed and I can tidy things up once again. But fingers crossed, that's not going to be long. Right, well, I'm going to head on into the podding shed and continuing this theme of hoarding. I've been looking at what tools I've really been using. In the meantime, let's find out what Chef Scott has for us this week.
Chopping all the veggies, sizzle in the air. Chef Scott with the magic, smells are everywhere. Water starts to boil, onions hit the pan. Recipe of the week, let the feast begin. Cooking with Chef Scott, flavors come alive. Tune in every week for a tasty bite.
Hi, it's Scott here with this week's recipe. And this week we have a cucumber recipe. And one with a difference, because we are going to cook the cucumber and serve it warm. Cooking the cucumber intensifies the flavour of it and I think adds another dimension to it. And the recipe is pan roast cucumber with cream, horseradish and lemon, served with hot smoked salmon and watercress. So let's not delay and head to the kitchen and hear how it's made. As usual, you can find this recipe and others on the veggrowerpodcast.co.uk and on my Instagram page, Seed to Table Plot 13. For this recipe, you will need 2 hot smoked salmon fillets that have been gently warmed, 1 bunch of watercress, and for the cucumbers, 240 grams of cucumbers cut into batons with the seeds removed, 15 grams of butter, 150 millilitres of double cream, 30 millilitres of water, 1 teaspoon of fresh grated horseradish or 1 teaspoon of horseradish cream, the zest of 1/4 of a lemon and the juice of half, and salt and pepper to taste. Method. In a hot frying pan with a little oil, start frying the cucumber on a high heat for 2 minutes or until the cucumber starts to colour and become golden brown. At this point, add the butter and cook for a further minute. Now add the water, followed by the cream and horseradish, then finish with the lemon zest and juice, and season with salt and pepper, and then bring to a boil. Then serve hot with the gently warmed hot smoked salmon and watercress, and enjoy. And that's the recipe done, and that's it from me this week.
Well, here I am back in the podding shed now, and I am surrounded by lots of items that I've amassed over the years. I have to admit, I am a terrible hoarder. I sometimes buy things that I think are going to be useful, or I hold on to bits of junk, shall we say, that I think I'm going to do a project with, and that project never happens. Sometimes I'm given things as well that I want to make content from, and often I fall behind on the content. Anyway, the point is that over the years, I've amassed, in particular, a large amount of tools. A few years ago, well, many years ago, before I moved into this house, I went through a stage where I was really interested in old gardening tools, such as turf cutters and things that don't really get used, but I thought they looked good. And of course, let's not forget countless spades, shovels, etc., etc. The question I found when I was tidying out my shed is, do I really need these all? Now, in the past, I've often believed in having spares. I have had forks and spades break on me in the middle of using them, usually in the middle of winter when I'm doing a big, heavy job. And I've always wanted to have a spare spade or shovel, just in case that happens. But it all takes up space, and space is of a premium, really. So I've been going through a lot of these tools, and I've been saying to myself, what do I really use on an almost daily basis? What I've done is I've come up with this list. Everything else I'm putting to one side. And if I do not use anything from that pile, if I use something from that pile within a year, it goes back into the other pile. But anything that I haven't used within a year, I will get rid of. So the list of the tools that I use a lot of, which I thought it would be useful to share with everybody out there. Now, this is a list of tools that I use both on the allotment and kitchen garden. This was one of my criteria. It's something that I have to use on both gardens, within reason, of course, but I have to use them regularly. Now, one of the first things that sprung to mind is, of course, my Hori knife. I always have this on me when I'm out in the garden, on my hip. And if you don't know what Hori knife is, it's a Japanese digging knife. So it's good for cutting things, like bits of strings, but it's also good for digging, just like a trowel. So I find this very, very useful to have on me at all times. It's amazing just how much you can get done when you have a tool on your belt at all times. Now, with that, secateurs are also something that I like to have to hand at all times as well. We do use a lot of secateurs. I used to actually have a multi-tool that I used to carry a lot around with me. It was a secateur that folded up to release mini saws, screwdrivers, etc., etc. That broke, unfortunately, so I don't use it so much. But secateurs are also something I find just useful to have on me at all times. The watering can, of course, that gets used pretty much every day. Not that I water all my beds the same time. I'd like to break it up. So I do use the watering can almost every day. I don't really use a hose that often. Some people do for a variety of reasons, but I personally don't use a hose that often. However, since I've recently got my new Ryobi water pump, I have found myself using a hose a little bit more, but more for pumping water. But we are looking at using that for watering the garden as well. For slightly larger tasks, I like to use a perennial spade. It's a fantastic small spade, about 2 foot tall, a little bit bigger than a trowel, shall we say. But what I like about this particular type of spade is that it's got a triangular head, which makes it great for really getting down in the soil, cutting through roots should we need to remove them, and really good for planting out plants. It's one of my favourite spades since I have recently discovered it. Hoe is often used as well quite regularly. The hoe is often called the gardener's best friend because it is used so much. Great for removing weeds. However, I do find myself removing weeds by hand more, so gloves would probably also be worth throwing in here as well. Larger jobs such as planting trees, I would use a spade. Now my spade is many years old, but still growing strong. I occasionally might use a fork, not as much as I think I should, but I often use the fork just to break up the soil to make it a little bit easier to get it out with a spade. And then of course I've got a shovel as well. Now the shovel is used more for shoveling compost into a wheelbarrow or when spreading it out. And also a rake, which I tend to use in the wintertime or when I'm spreading the compost. Now the power tools that I do use on a regular basis, lawnmower, strimmer and a hedge cutter as well. I find that these three power tools just make life quite easy. All mine are battery powered, Ryobi again. And I use the hedge cutter actually a lot for trimming down hedges, of course, but also for cutting down things like brambles and nettles, just because it is so useful. And then we trim it down as well with line strimmer and cut over with the lawnmower to make everything into tiny little pieces. So it goes into the compost nice and easy. Now, there are more tools that we might possibly use, as I've already mentioned, but they're going to be waiting. And if we don't use them in a year's time, we're going to get rid of them. No point having stuff that we are not using that much. But I'm sure I would love to know what tools you use regularly and whether you actually find yourself having tools that you think you're going to use that never get used. Now, one tool I'm actually considering leaving in both my vehicles for when I go to the allotment is a battery angle grinder. Now, there's a bit of a story about this. I visited the allotment on my way home from work this evening. Did a bit of work, as you would do, chatted to one of my neighbours as well. But when I went to leave, I noticed there was a crowd of people by the front gate. And I could tell that there was a problem going on. I got out of the car and found out that somebody had snapped their key in the lock, which meant none of us could actually get out from our allotment site. Now, there's a lot of people already on the allotment at this time, including us that were waiting to get out. We rang the out of hours council, but they couldn't actually help us. Their advice was to either cut away the lock or call a locksmith, and they would happily reimburse for the locksmith. Luckily, we managed to call somebody that did have a battery angle grinder, and they managed to cut the lock out and we could escape. That meant, however, it took me a little bit longer on the allotment. We were stuck there for another 20 minutes, I would say. Now, 20 minutes isn't that long in the grand scheme of things, but when you're up against it and time's a rush, it would have been good to get out much quicker. Now, the key snapping in the lock isn't the first time that this has happened to me. Not my key, I should add, somebody else, but I remember about 5 years ago a key had snapped in a lock, but I was on the other side trying to get in then. This is one of the joys, isn't it? With keys and things that break, we could end up being locked in. Has this ever happened to you, however? I'd love to know. If you do, please do get in touch. Well, we're coming to the end of this week's podcast. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, then please do leave us a rate and review on your podcast provider. We haven't had many reviews over this last week, but one that did come in from Ian McCracken on YouTube. He says, "Great podcast, Richard. Sets me up for the day. I'm off to plant 5 fruit trees for a client. Luckily, we have just had some welcome rain." Thank you very much for that, Ian. I actually met Ian at the weekend as well, so very lovely to meet you too. If you would be good enough to leave us a rate and review, it really helps with the algorithms and get us found by more people. If you've also enjoyed this podcast, you want to help support the work that we do, then please consider becoming a member of the Veg Grower Podcast Supporters Club. Just £5 a month, you get seeds, you get a mini newspaper, and you get extra behind the scenes podcast. If you do want to email me, my email address is richard@veggrowerpodcast.co.uk. You can visit the website, theveggrowerpodcast.co.uk, where you can leave us a comment, or you can also leave us a voicemail. We do like voicemails here at the Veg Grower Podcast. And of course, don't forget to follow us on social media. Well, that is it for this week. Until next time, please take care.